Brunanburg, 27th of October, 937. Not far from there, Osrith thought, as the shields were assembled in front of her, and the plain of men stood in a line, another battle had been fought, another battle between Saxon and Briton. Oswald, king and saint, crossing from the limit of his lands in Northumbria, had crossed the air gap from Elfoic and was heading to the northern lands of Cymru, to Gwynedd, and Cadwalladen's kingdom. Why he had been there, so deep in enemy territory, Osrith did not know. No one knew, only that his archenemy and uncle, Edwin, had alliances in Gwynedd, still, and that those alliances were, possibly, threatening Oswald's claim as king. For, Edwin had married a Gwyneddian princess, before eschewing her for his Saintish bride, and becoming a Christian. Perhaps Oswald's uncle had left a family behind, a family that now was putting in a claim for Bernicia and Dyria, no Ethumbria. Or perhaps, such as was today's battle, a decision had been made to drive the Saxon into the sea whence he had come and reclaim the lands of the Gododine and Ketterage for the Britons once more. Oswald was slaughtered that day. Bede was clear on that, as had been Father Booker, as had Elfric, her friend from long ago, beside her since Wessex, when he spoke of Mercia's triumphs, of which there have been few. Elfric had once told her, and Ethelred had sought to claim the body of Oswald, the pieces into which he had been sliced under Penda's orders. Mercia had won that day. Few was not true, Osrith knew. Offa had been king for nearly 40 years, and he, like Aethelstan, had styled himself Monarchus Totius Britanniae. But Elfric had been displaced to Wessex because of the Danish invasion, and Mercia had suffered the despoils of the Northmen. And Mercia was again suffering despoils, as Northmen, including the men of Alba, as they had always done back even to Talison's time. Bactuged and the move of the Hainaut led to Gwynedd, had despoiled deep into Mercia again, this time, with Constantine's consent. They were never to be governed, never to be sub-kings. How far away Alba felt now, those northern kingdoms, who had taken her in and which she had called home, which her son and daughter called home. Smash my enemies to dust and into the earth, slaughter them with my sword. That had been Ethelstan's prayer, as they knelt in the chapel at Ead Spirig, and by my sword he meant all of the swords of Mercia. Perhaps he had tried to shock Osrith, although he must have known she was not easily shocked. Thinking about his words now, and his inaction in Mercia for so long as the Picts and Attocotian Gaels raided, perhaps it was for himself, to garner the strength to win. Osrith considered, as her eyes railed over the Northern Alliance, for he had to win, or the Saxons and Angles, Mercia and Wessex, would be no more. It was strange what came to mind when battle was close. Osrith thought. Her brother, to her right, and Finan to her left, said nothing as the battle lines assembled, said nothing. And it occurred to Osrith then how strange it was, how she had willed herself so many times to be beside him, to fight as kin, that it took until now for it to happen. A few spits of rain fell on Osrith's face. Where anyone was anyone's guess. She nearly had been capped into Elfkin's mercenaries again and could hear them talking. Osrith did not turn round, but listened. The Welsh are not here, I am telling you. That was Oisir's voice, protesting, presumably at the assertion. They are there, the Gwynedians are there, Oisir said, but not King Hywel's men. No Welsh, she heard Egelfrith sigh. Welsh on the deal again. A pause. No offence intended, Elfkin. Osrith shuddered, remembering that Elfkin had married Haf, and had had Elena and a young son, who had been killed in Lundin, at the battle before Ethelstan's coronation. Mercenaries, she heard another voice complain. It was Egil, who was standing beside Utad. And then, before Osrith could begin to plan her battle strategy, the man began to sing. His notes were not widely varied, unlike the singing she had heard in Winchester under Dunstan's bishopric. The words sat more as a rhythm, and Osrith was transported to Eric Thurgilson's voice, with the same intonation, as he had given her hope when hope had faded, imprisoned as she had been in Caerliguilid, all those years ago. I've carried the blood-stained sword and the slippery spear, the raven at my right hand. As we raiders went forwards, burning for battle, we made their barns blaze. Where were they, the enemy?" asked a voice beside Idjul. His brother, Berg, was speaking. If he was not eating or fighting, Berg was speaking. "Just before you, you dullard," Idjul chided. "And it is your hide their swords will bounce off first." Berg replied happily. And Osrith had seen Idjul fight in a drunken state when she arrived at Caligulid. The Sikhs that his opponent had been holding seemed to be stopped by some invisible force. Uhtred had done well to place him in behind of the linden shields, making the front row of the shield wall. Osrith inhaled, noticing the man swigging from a leather sack for nerves. It was not new the Britons at Carthage, fighting the Saxons of old were, according to Taliesin, Hywel had shown her the book, one which the Gwynedians held so dear and that he had claimed for his palace at Deheubarth in order to legitimize his takeover of the whole of the Cymri people. Where were her kin? All the people she had known were arrayed before her, amongst helm and spear and blade, all those she had loved, all those she loved beside her, to the right and to the left. Because this was not just one choice or another, this was far too complicated. And yet it came down to it, her blade against those of her enemy. So many of them. Her stomach heaved as she thought of the Northern Alliance, sway with Constantine, and young Finan, the Mormers, Engus and Phelim, Dubcan, Malcolm, Domnall's son, Selark and Domnall, Owain and his sons, Eochaid and Diffnwell, with the Norse and the Gaels. To her right and left, her mercenaries, still discussing the shortcomings of the Welsh, Elfkin, and Ossier, Egelfrith, Falkbald, Miral would be there, Aldhelm too. And there were those who would not be there, Elfrith, Elfgar, the West Saxons, who hated Aethelstan but stood beside him on behalf of Edmund and Edgar. Edward's sons too, sons of Eadgyth, a woman he came to love, in the end. A long line of iron-bound willow shields were carried by warriors also wielding swords. Spears and axes were in front of them now. How could she choose? Osrith already had. In the fortress behind them, Uhtred's younger son, was waiting. He had married the youngest daughter of Ethelelm, who had chosen to accompany the slaves liberated by Uhtred when he had gone to fight for Constantine to be king. He had Elswith had fallen for one another, and she had a child, and another on the way. Besides, Stjora's 2 children growing up in Alba, in Dunnottar, even now being protected behind the fortress in the high-quality care that was Edra's. Her brother had his bloodline now. The street on which Osrith had walked filled her mind's eye, brilliantly colored visions against the increasing graying of these battle-leaden skies, where more drips of rain fell to their faces. Osrith had consulted Allah, the Briton living with her people and with the daily threat of betrayal for practicing her people's customs, for Uhtred's youngest son. The boy had lived, and his mother had not. Thorold Skilligrimson, next to Finan, Osrith, solid and sturdy, dug his feet into the earth and spat. And then, all at once, Osrith saw Owain, standing between a group of men on the far left of the northern rank, the Strathclydians' black shields beside those paler from the forest at Stirling. Beside him, Constantine's blue cross on white fluttered on a spear shaft next to Domnall's red hand. Osrith's heart lurched. Had it not been for Constantine's insistence that she wed and sleep with Domnall to consolidate his alliance, she would be next to him, next to young Finan and her foster son-in-law Anlaf, and, perhaps, Ragnar, Uhtred's grandson. If only he knew. If only Uhtred would turn and she might say. As it was, he surely knew something, for Osrith was a head shorter than young Uhtred. Surely Anlaf would not have brought the boy. Stjora and Sigtrygg's son, and daughter, would have been taken to that island fortress Elenvanin, with Edra. No doubt she was a prize. Cumbraland was her land, once Osrith's, once Gwythelth's. It was invaluable, but more than that, she was loved. So very much loved by Anlaf that it hurt to think about it. And Osrith considered that the only thing that would be worse than taking part in the battle that was to come would be waiting to one side while it was fought without her. This was not her fight. She could no more choose a side than choose which foot she preferred. She could, however, walk the gap. The time was coming where this common practice would occur. Not many walked the gap, changed sides, but it was an option. She could find Angus and Phelim, find Malcolm and Selark. She could dash to her right. Utad turned to her. She must not speak. Not that she could leave the field, now, in any case, unless to walk over to the enemy. If she had to choose, and she had done, she would be fighting for Aethelstan. Not for honor and glory, nor yet loyalty, but because what Aethelstan had established was more than anyone had done since the time of the Latins, an organized system of government which was benefiting the inhabitants of this land beginning to be called England. The coinage was the same, there were the same laws for everyone. People could live, there was growth and prosperity. People could love their lands and know that it would be protected, and this showed with the sheer number of Danes fighting for and with Aethelstan. An idea that their settled land might be threatened by Anlaf's allies had stirred them to give their arms to the king of Mercia and Wessex, to England. Osrith was fighting that enough of Northumbria's bravest and best survived that day to return to their home and preserve the culture of their own. Aethelstan had sanctioned her position. Bibbenberg kept her there. But if either Utad or Finan had had time to work out that it was not young Utad standing between them, they had no opportunity to act. On the field, Aethelstan stood before the line. His generals stood before their companies. Good. Very good. Have the message be conveyed at the same time to his army. Both Edmund and Eardred stood proud of the line. With their father they rode up and down, demanding that they fight for their country being their people, their families, all that they held dear. For they will kill and ravage worse than ever the northern host ever did. May God strike them down at the points of our swords and let the scourge of the land be pounded into the muddy earth. The Northern Alliance surged forward. The Morrigan stirred. The Battle of Brunanburh, and for England, had begun.